Hello and welcome to our first live Tell Me More About session of this evening. For the next 20 minutes or so, we will dive deeper into the topic of removable restorations combining teeth and implants with Professor Peter Rammelsberg. And remember, we are on Channel 1, this is live, so make sure you make the most of this session by submitting any questions you might have. Now, Peter Rammelsberg is currently joining us live from Germany. Good evening, Peter. Thank you for being with us. Where exactly are you tonight?
I'm in my office in Heidelberg.
Well, we're glad you're able to join us via this live connection. You are the director of the Dental School of Ruprecht Karls University in Heidelberg, Germany. And you will tell us more about the removable restorations combining teeth and implants. So let's start with the very basics. Why and when would we consider combining teeth and implants at the same time?
So it's always, if you have residual abutment teeth that can serve as abutments, and if the abutment teeth have an acceptable prognosis, and they are very helpful to reduce the number of implants needed for the stabilization of the denture.
Exactly. So if the teeth are okay, you would consider this option. But later tonight, we will talk about fixed restorations. What makes you choose for a removable solution in this case?
Well, it's only a question of the number of abutment teeth and implants that are available. So the idea of combining both works for both, for removable and fixed. But in case of removable, the number of abutment teeth and implants is reduced combined to a fixed situation. So the number of implants decides which type of denture can be placed.
Exactly. And what is the cutoff point? Is it just as soon as we go to 2, we can go removable, or is there another number?
I think if we have less than 4 or around 4, we prefer the removal. And as soon we are close to 6, then we prefer the fixed. So there's not an exact red line, but I think it's a number between 4 and 8 and 6 implants that decides whether removal or fixed.
Exactly. Now, let's dive into the science behind this. What can you tell us about the reliability and the prognosis of removable restorations combining teeth and implants?
So what we found is that the prognosis is not negative if the teeth are integrated. But what we also know is that the prognosis of removable dentures is slightly worse compared to fixed prosthesis, but still at a very acceptable level.
Okay, so slightly less than fixed. Do you any big studies you want to refer to?
Oh, I would like to present some initial studies from our department, and we have experience with analysis of the implant prognosis, of the prognosis of the abutment teeth, and also on the prognosis of the denture. And I think then the prognosis is pretty fine.
Pretty fine, yeah. That's an interesting comment from a scientific perspective, but you say it's a solid solution. Obviously, it's been around for a while. So let's dive into the more difficult area. What are some of the complications we have to keep an eye on when choosing this solution for our patients?
So the complications are predominantly caused by the basis. So we have a certain percentage of implant losses, implant failures, also losses of abutment teeth, and some sort of severe complications caused by peri-implantitis. And additionally, we also observe complications that derive from the occlusal material that covers the occlusal surface, because we see that the acrylic dental teeth and also the composite veneers are not the best material if we face high masticatory forces that can be enabled by this type of denture.
Yeah, you mentioned the masticatory forces. What kind of forces can we expect in these type of cases?
So if we have an edentulous jaw, then we know that the masticatory forces are reduced to only 100 Newton compared to 400 Newton in natural dentitions. And if you only place 2 implants and in the mandible and use a joint bar, then we can increase the chewing forces to 170 Newton. But if you use a double crown retained prosthesis with more than 2 abutments, then we can achieve chewing forces that are close to natural dentitions. These are much higher, but it depends on the attachment system we use and whether the attachment system provides also the support function.
Can you elaborate a little bit on that? How does it work? How does the combination of the tooth and the implant lead to the bigger resistance of forces?
It depends a little bit on the placement, on the location of the implants, and we always try to place the implants with the aim at maximizing the polygon of support. And the second aspect is that we not only look at retention, but we also look at support and to manufacture a rigid framework that combines both implants and natural teeth dentition with double crowns. So that the denture, if the denture is loaded, all the forces are distributed on the implants and the abutment teeth.
Okay, so that is how the forces are newly distributed. Now, we've also read that because of the natural mobility, of course, of the teeth, that there can be an overloading of the implants in this combined situation. It's been discussed in science and in literature. So is this overloading then maybe also a source of biological complications?
So that was an important point of discussion during the last decade. But we found in our studies that the prognosis of the implants was even slightly better if there's a combined support. So we have no evidence that an overloading of the implants occurred or that an implant was loosened without signs of peri-implantitis. So we think that it works both nicely and the combination is not a risk factor.
Okay, so there's no risk factor there. How are you dealing with this change? The fact that the teeth are often much more moving than the crowns and more importantly, the implants.
So the mobility of an implant is almost zero. And we have a tooth mobility of some microns. Mm-hmm. And this mobility is different. But we think in a natural loading situation, the mobility of the teeth is much smaller because it's a dynamic process. There's only short impulses on the abutment teeth, and we don't see a mobility of 50 or 100 microns, but much less in regular use of the dentures.
Yeah. So would you say this fear of the mobility of the teeth is actually overestimated by some of our colleagues?
Yes, I think it's overestimated, and we already know it works for fixed dentures and it also works for removable dentures. We don't know exactly the mechanism why it works so nicely, but if you look at our prognostic factors, then we can see it's no risk factor, and teeth and implants can easily be combined.
Exactly. Now, what are the options if the retention of a galvanic double crown is lost?
Oh, that's a critical point, because sometimes the retention is reduced after several years of use, and then we have the good opportunity, if it's an implant-supported telescope, then we can replace the secondary crown. But in this case, we have to unscrew the primary crown and to manufacture a new galvanic crown, and that has then be replaced intraorally by bonding into the framework. And prior to this, the old secondary crown has to be removed and sandblasted. The cobalt chromium structure I might show you later on some pictures, and then it can be rebonded. But in cases if the retention is lost on a natural teeth, on an abutment placed on a natural teeth, then it has to be removed. The primary crown has to be destroyed, and we have to make a new primary crown and reintegrate it under the framework.
Exactly.
That's more technical and more expensive.
Well, you refer to showing us on some pictures. Feel free to bring in some pictures into the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, I would like to show you some.
Please, yeah, just share your screen and show us, just like we did yesterday. That's fine.
So that's a primary idea, and this is based on an alternative on the common concept of using 4 implants, the all-on-4 concept, and we like this concept on the right side a little bit more. Then we can preserve the abutment teeth and combine implants with natural abutment teeth. And yeah, the idea is if we want to make a denture with more than 2 abutments, we want to achieve more than 170 Newton, and our treatment is driven by the following thoughts. Then we want to have more than 170 Newton masticatory forces provided by the denture. And the main idea is to provide additional support by the attachment system. And we also expect a reduction of the load on the residual abutment teeth. And the concept is double crowns with passive fit for the rigid connection of the prosthesis. And these are the clinical pictures that highlight most important treatment steps. In this case, we have 3 natural abutment teeth provided by primary crowns and 2 implants, one in the central incisor position, the other in the bicuspid position. And these are also provided with a screwed primary crown. Then the secondary crown is manufactured individually for each primary crown, and then a cobalt chromium framework is casted. Some impressions are added to preserve the centrifugation, and the final decisive step is that the primary crowns are cemented on the abutment teeth and screwed with 35 Newton centimeter onto the implants. And then the secondary crowns are placed on the primary crowns, and the framework is bonded intraorally to the secondary crown. This decisive step compensates for the manufacturing tolerances and results in passive fit of the rigidly connected RDP. And then the prosthesis can be finished by adding veneers, composite veneers to the secondary crowns and to the double crowns and acrylic denture teeth. And to show you a little bit about the prognosis that we discussed earlier, when we can see an earlier study when we looked at the prognosis of the implants, we can clearly see if we combine our failures of the abutments, we have 6 losses of implants, 4 losses of abutment teeth, combined with severe complication, predominantly peri-implantitis, then we can see that the prognosis of the implants under prosthesis with combined support was even slightly better compared to the prognosis of the implants under solely implant-supported prosthesis. And the predominant risk factor, however, was the location. And we see that the implants placed in the maxilla have a 4 times higher risk of a severe complication compared to mandibular implants.
So, would that lead you to the conclusion, Peter, that you would refrain from this solution in the maxilla?
No, because you don't have a choice. The maxilla also needs a stabilized denture. And I still think that a success curve of 85% after 5 years for the implants is still an acceptable prognosis. We have to know that the mandible is easier to and has a better prognosis, but we also need a solution for the maxilla.
Yeah. So in this case, you would find this acceptable, and your message is that we really need to be aware that this is an area with larger risk factors.
Of course, that's exactly the
All right.
the result.
Cool. Well, I seem to have kicked you off into presentation mode, which is great. I don't know if you have much more, but tell us. But in the meantime, since we are on the topic of evidence, I would like to read out a viewer question that just came in, because obviously this topic has been around for quite a long time, and there has been quite some research. One of our viewers would like you to comment on the old, quote-unquote, Ignacio Naert study, which has demonstrated that in a long-term study, there's more failures and there's more bone loss when you choose for this solution. What is your response to that?
I'm not familiar with this specific study, but for the double crown retained prosthesis, this is it's a study with the highest sample size, and in 2019, we finished the study with a 12-year observation period. And from our results, using double crowns as an attachment system, we could not find or not prove this, the result of the study.
Okay, so you're not familiar with those research results. In the meantime, we're still looking at your last slide. Let me ask you, do you have more slides to show and talk us through, or shall we continue the conversation? Because in that case, I would like to see your face again. Tell us, Peter.
I think I have one final slide of interest.
Go ahead.
This is a prognosis of a prosthesis. And in this case, we have a 12-year study on almost 140 prostheses. And we see an excellent survival rate of the dentures, above 95%, and only minimal complete failures. This is a prognosis of the prosthesis. And if we combine again some severe complications, a total number of 13, then we can again make a statistical analysis with this kind of Kaplan-Meier curves. And we can see that these success curves, these are not survival curves, but it's survival without any severe complication. We can see that the mandibular dentures have a prognosis around 95% after 10 years. This is in the region of fixed dentures. And the maxillar prosthesis have a prognosis, a success rate of around slowly below 80% after 9 years. And on the left, you see some severe complications. And the one that occurred is fracture of the framework, and it's clearly caused by an underextension of the cobalt chromium framework. But on the other side, you see a problem with wear of the composite veneers and wear of the acrylic teeth. And this is a consequence of the high masticatory forces provided by this type of dental prosthesis. And this is a final scientific background I would like to present.
Perfect. Well, if you take down your slides, we'll be able to see you again. And I see some questions coming in from our audience. If you're just joining us, we are live here on Channel 1 talking to Peter Rammelsberg about removable restorations combining teeth and implant. And if you have questions for Peter, please take the opportunity to send them in. Now, we just ended on your slide with the complications. Feel free to take it down, Peter, so we are able to see you again. I want to ask you a little bit more about the materials, because you referred to that when we were talking for the first time about complications as well. Which materials are most suitable for the primary and secondary double crowns?
For the primary, let's start
with
the
Peter, we still don't see you. Let's see if you can say stop sharing. Yes, there you are. Welcome back.
Nice. Okay. For the primary crowns, we always started with high precious alloys. But meanwhile, we have other options. We can manufacture these primary crowns from titanium. We can manufacture it with cobalt chromium or high precious alloys. Or meanwhile, we can also manufacture it from zirconium dioxide ceramics. There we are free. The more difficult part is the secondary crown. If we use secondary crowns, then we rely on the galvanic crowns, and this is always a 99% precious gold alloy that is used. But for the primary crowns, you have a lot of options. And for the secondary crowns that are mostly casted from cobalt chromium, no, not the secondary, but the framework, but there are new options developed. And we start to integrate also CAD-CAM, the CAD-CAM options for the secondary crowns and for the framework. But this is not included in my studies I presented. This is new development.
Yeah, this is additional information. Now, we have a question from one of our viewers, which also reads, what can you say about unsealing? Is there a lot of unsealing of the crowns in this combined solution?
What do you mean with unsealing? I don't know what's meant by unsealing.
To be honest, I'm just reading out the question here. The question literally says, is there a lot of unsealing of the crowns with this combined technique?
Do you mean the loss of retention of... what is meant about that?
I cannot ask. I can only ask the viewer who submitted that question to elaborate. But please go on. Yes.
So if it's meant that the secondary crown lost the retention in the framework, that is very rare. It only occurred in two times with more than 400 implants and 200 abutment teeth in our study. This is a very rare event. But wear problems with the secondary crowns are a little bit more frequent, so that we have sort of wear after 5-8 years with the secondary crowns.
Exactly. And when you say a little bit more frequent, is it that serious that we would consider a different follow-up protocol, or is it just, does it show up in regular checks? We have some modifications meanwhile, and to reduce the wear problem, we prefer now to use cobalt chromium secondary crowns for the natural abutment teeth, but not for the implants, because we want to preserve the passive fit for the integration of the implants into the denture. Exactly. Now, in the beginning, when I asked you why and when would you consider this solution, you referred to the health of the tooth that you need to consider before you go. There's a question coming in related to that. Like, do you consider that a periodontally compromised tooth can be a limit to this technique? Yes, obviously yes, but I'd like to ask you then, how do we determine where the boundary is? What is a clear red flag for you?
Yeah, I think the prognosis of a natural teeth is strongly related to the attachment level that's still available. So we don't use abutment teeth less than 40 to 50% of attachment because the prognosis is reduced. But anything between 50 and 70% is an option to preserve the tooth. But the double crowns are pretty expensive, so we don't use them on abutment teeth with less than 30% attachment. And the attachment level, I think, is a decisive point for the decision whether to preserve or whether not to use them on the prosthesis.
Exactly. Well, that is a very clear practical advice here on this, nearing already the end of this Tell Me More About session. Now, to summarize for our viewers, what would you say is the most important take-home message for our viewers to remember?
The most important, if it's only one, then I would say don't remove residual abutment teeth in severely reduced dentitions if they have an acceptable prognosis and acceptable attachment level, because the number of implants needed can be reduced and the risk for the restoration and the risk for the implants is not increased by this technique. Sometimes, in some cases, it's even a lower risk for this type of denture.
Exactly. So that's a strong, passionate argument for the tooth. Save a tooth if you can and consider a removable combination of teeth and implant. Peter Rammelsberg, thank you very much for your willingness to come on this EAO Digital live show. Thank you for all your great advice.